Welcome to episode number 22 of British Strength Radio. And this is somewhat of an atypical episode in that it's just me today, your usual host, Alexander Clarke, and I will be redoing a seminar that I presented at the University of Manchester Students' Union for University of Manchester Powerlifting Club. The seminar was on nutrition. And before we get into that, I'd just like to say, as usual, if you would like to support the generation of future episodes of this podcast, you can go over to BritishStrengthMagazine.com and subscribe to British Strength Magazine. We have articles by the brightest minds in the UK strength sports industry and interviews with the strongest and most interesting UK strength athletes. And when I do say this, it's not just a case of please subscribe, give me more money. The podcasts that you're listening to now and enjoy so much are directly funded by the magazine in terms of hosting, equipment, travel, etc. So not only are you getting a subscription to a great magazine with great content, and I'm sure all the subscribers agree, you're actually funding this podcast directly. So thank you if you have subscribed. So without further ado, let's get into the seminar. Nutrition for the Powerlifter. I thought I would give a little bit of background before getting into the actual, meat and potatoes, excuse the pun, of the seminar, as to why you might want to listen to me in terms of nutrition. So I started bodybuilding when I was 15 years old, obviously taking an active interest in nutrition from there. I competed in the UK BFF British Finals, which was then the most prestigious British Finals at the time, 3 times, placing 4th and 5th on a couple of the occasions, so they were my best placings to date there. I competed for a total of 6 years. Obviously I went over to powerlifting when I was 24. At university I studied a BSc in Applied Sports Science. And of course, since I left university, I have been training clients and I've always offered a nutrition service to them. So I've always been working with clients on the nutrition, performing various transformations, even bodybuilding contest preps, figure contest preps. And as I have competed in powerlifting, that has transitioned more onto performance nutrition. Excuse me. So that's me and my intro, so let's get really into this now. Okay, so why is nutrition important for powerlifting? And if you're watching on YouTube, you can actually see the slides, but if you can't, then I have a picture of Eric Lillibridge's back as he's locking out a deadlift, and the quote, "We get asked everywhere what it takes to be the best. Well, it takes everything." That's a quote by Ernie Lillibridge Sr. Now, he's Eric Lillibridge's dad, Ernie Lillibridge's dad too. And they are a family of powerlifters. And, basically what he's saying there is that they live their lives around powerlifting. Eric and Ernie, Eric was the first person before Luke broke the record. Luke Richardson broke the record to total 1,000 kilos. He was the youngest person, to total 1,000 kilos. So all their life was dedicated to powerlifting. There are many different ways in which you can improve, and I think the majority of us do just focus on training. And it's a hobby to us, and that's totally fine. But there are other aspects of your life. I mean, I've always been taught that the big 3 are train, eat, and sleep. That was what I was taught when I started bodybuilding. And the same thing kind of applies to powerlifting as well, but not many people focus on the nutrition side. I don't know how many of you will have seen the movie Any Given Sunday, but there's a speech by Al Pacino, who plays the coach in that movie, where he talks about how football, like life, is a game of inches. He says that inches we need are everywhere around us, basically meaning that ways to improve are all over the place. You can find them all over the place, and if you keep adding those little 1% up, they will add and add up until eventually your progress is far, far greater than you ever thought it would be. Your potential is greater than you actually realize it is now, and not many people, well, barely anyone actually achieves the potential. But if you just add in the different components of being better, i.e. nutrition, training and sleep, and you get them all right, then you're going to be a lot closer to achieving your potential than you would be if you only ever focused on training and just ate what you want. Body composition, another reason why nutrition is important. A muscle's potential, the key emphasis is on potential there, to gain strength is directly proportionate to its cross-sectional area. Now what that means is a bigger muscle has more potential to gain strength than a smaller muscle does. That's not to say that the biggest bodybuilders in the world will be the strongest people just because they are the biggest bodybuilders. It just means that their bigger muscles, have more potential to gain strength if put through strength training cycles. Of course, powerlifting is a weight class sport and only muscle can contract, not fat. So, 20, 30 years ago, you used to see people in the powerlifting weight classes who weren't quite as, shall we say, jacked, so lean and muscular within that weight class. But it doesn't happen so much anymore because the sport has become more competitive. And in order to do well in the sport, you need to pack as much muscle mass into your weight class as possible. Because, like I said, only muscle can contract, not fat. You need to maximize your weight class, and that's how people are getting better and better these days. Just look at the top men and women in the weight classes. I've put a picture of Steffi Cohen on this slide, and I believe she competes as a 60 or a 56. I could be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the two. And she definitely maximizes her weight class. If you're watching on the YouTube video, you'll see just how jacked and lean she is. Okay, and of course, if you want to look significantly better, you need to have some control over your nutrition. This has been drilled into me from day one since I started bodybuilding. You're not going to do bodybuilding without, a significant emphasis on your nutrition. So if you are just a normal person looking to look better, you're going to have some handle over it. Performance, what most of us are interested in. In order to train and compete optimally, a lifter must be adequately hydrated and have enough energy in the form of calories taken in from food to complete the workout or competition. The types and amounts of foods and fluids you consume leading up to, directly before and during a session/competition will have a direct impact on your mental state and performance. So, just a little example of what I mean by mental state there. I, a lot of the time, used to get into the gym and feel like I wanted to go back to bed as soon as I got in to the gym, procrastinate a lot of my workout, just generally felt like low energy. But since then I tried something which I tried very, very briefly during my bodybuilding days, which was a low carb, zero carb in fact, high fat, high protein breakfast before I trained. And the effects of that have been quite dramatic to me. No longer do I eat breakfast and feel like I want to go to sleep. I eat breakfast and feel kind of neutral, like I can actually train, like nourished by breakfast. So that's what I mean by how nutrition will have a direct impact on your mental state too, and I'll probably go into that a little bit more later. Recovery. If you're watching on the YouTube version, there's a picture of one of my favourite bodybuilders from back in the day, Jay Cutler, taking a nap. So without adequate protein to repair broken down muscle tissue and carbohydrates to replenish glycogen reserves, recovery simply will not happen optimally. Water and electrolytes are lost through sweat and must be replenished. Optimal nutrition leads to optimal sleep and CNS function. So you're thinking things there like if you're deficient in magnesium, you won't sleep as well. Hence, you won't recover as well. Greater recovery facilitates more frequent training. So this is an extreme example, if you're on one of these squat everyday programs, you better make sure that you're recovering in between your sessions. Otherwise, or you're recovering as much as you can, otherwise the program's just not going to be effective. If you're a guy on 1,500 calories and you're trying to really put some muscle mass on, put some strength on, it's just not gonna happen as well as if you fuel your body properly for that goal. So hormonal. Tied into body composition, performance and recovery is the hormonal effect of food. Tied into body composition, performance and recovery is the hormonal effect of food. Our hormones are affected by what we eat in both the short and long term. So there's a picture of some eggs there. I remember hearing on the news a lot about how we should really, limit our consumption of cholesterol, but what people don't take into account is how important cholesterol is for the manufacture of hormones, testosterone, and that's important for the athlete. And of course, our hormones will have a huge knock-on effect to our health. Nutrition basics. Macronutrients. So if you're watching on YouTube, I've put a slide there of some donuts, and on the right hand side of it is quite a balanced diet. Looks like more of like a Mediterranean diet, really. Some salmon there, some berries, things like that. But that is just to illustrate like the two ways that people go about nutrition a lot of the time. Some people are in the IAFYM, if it fits your macros camp, and some people are in the clean eating camp. But one of them is based solely around macronutrients. So what a macronutrient is, it's a protein, carbohydrate, fat, or fibre. And the reason it's called a macronutrient is because it's needed in quantities of more than a few grams daily. Okay, so micronutrients. Micronutrients are various vitamins and minerals including the electrolytes. They are needed in less than a few grams daily, so that's why they're called micronutrients. So one of the macronutrients, protein, is an essential macronutrient, meaning that if you never took any protein in again, you'd die. Protein molecules are the building blocks of our muscles and organs. Protein cannot be stored and therefore must be consumed at regular intervals. Okay, so what this means is, whereas carbohydrates and fat can be stored, protein cannot. So protein is needed. Your organs need protein. So therefore, if you do not get protein at regular intervals, what will happen is the protein will be cleaved from your muscles to suit the organs' needs, because that's the main priority. This is a reason why, as powerlifters, bodybuilders, body composition type people, we need to eat protein at regular intervals. That's about 4 hours. Protein is broken down into amino acids, both essential and non-essential. There are 9 essential amino acids, and you should strive to eat foods which contain all 9 of them. These are called complete proteins. How much protein? Research has shown that anywhere in between 1.2 and 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight is an effective daily protein intake for athletes. The optimal meal frequency for protein feeding is around 4 hours or 4 daily servings. So the 2.2 grams is an interesting one, because that was 2 grams, the research said, up until recently, when they did a study on bodybuilders, whereby they found that the remaining amino acids above about 25 grams per serving were not being oxidized. They're actually being used for tissue building. So if muscle building is your primary concern, then that's, higher protein intakes can be useful, and it'd be interesting to see if something more than 2.2 grams was studied, what the effects would be, because we've always known that bodybuilders take in very high amounts of protein, and it'd be interesting to see whether there is some kind of use for these ridiculously high protein intakes. For example, Ronnie Coleman, Kai Green, just off the top of my head, I remember them both having protein intakes of somewhere like 600 grams daily, which is absolutely ridiculous. Complete protein sources, something I just touched on there. For meat eaters, you have meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. And for vegans, soy, quinoa, buckwheat, hemp, and chia seeds. Vegans can also combine certain incomplete protein sources to form a complete protein. A good example here would be rice and beans, or wholemeal bread and hummus. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not an essential macronutrient. So, unlike protein, unlike fat, they are not essential to eat. We could go on a Atkins diet, for example, 0 carbohydrates for the rest of our lives, and we would be fine. We wouldn't die anyway. Glucose is the brain's preferred source of fuel. So the best way I can explain this one, let's say, for example, if you've ever met a competitive bodybuilder and they're on a low carbohydrate diet and they're a few weeks out from a show, apart from being somewhat down from their body fat set point and their body saying to them, please put some fat on me, this is not comfortable, their brain is kind of starved of glucose at this point, and that's why they kind of slow down. They're just craving carbs so badly. They slow down, become moody, irritable, etc. That's what a low carb diet can do, and that's an illustration of how the glucose is the brain's preferred source of fuel. Carbohydrates are broken down into monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. That means 1, 2, 3 molecules. Carbohydrates are stored as, not 3, or multiple molecules, sorry. Carbohydrates are stored as glycogen in the muscles and liver. Okay, so sleep will deplete your liver glycogen reserves, hence why some endurance athletes really, really need to top their muscle glycogen, their liver glycogen reserves up when they wake. Otherwise, they risk, they call it bonking in cycling, hitting the wall even, in marathon running, stuff like that. Of course, you would want to keep topping yourself up with carbohydrates as you ran, but not topping your liver glycogen up is more of a mistake in endurance sports than it is strength sports. Muscle glycogen can be used from the days before. Carbohydrates have a protein-sparing effect, meaning that if you are consuming a good amount of carbohydrates, you are at less risk of burning protein for fuel. Burning protein for fuel is not what we want. How many carbohydrates? Okay, so due to the fact that carbohydrates are a non-essential macronutrient and the body's preferred source of fuel for intense workouts, there is no one answer to this question. However, as powerlifters, we sometimes engage in voluminous bouts of high-intensity exercise and also benefit from full glycogen reserves for our leverages. So it makes sense to eat a high-carb diet. So your leverages, you've heard this term bandied around, will be better if you eat a high-carbohydrate diet, because carbohydrates draw in 3 grams of water for every 1 gram of carbohydrate consumed into the muscle cell. So that makes the muscle fuller and hence improves your leverages for lifting. If you're completely glycogen depleted, then your leverages won't be as good and you will not be as strong, in theory. And I mean, I've had this happen to me during a bodybuilding diet when I completely decided to cut carbohydrates down. The very next couple of days in the gym, I was significantly weaker, and I literally saw my muscles shrink in front of my own eyes. It sounds ridiculous, but it happened. I saw it happen. So carbs are important for strength athletes. Also, don't discount the fact that many carb foods are abundant in micros. So, for example, if you're only eating from 2 of the macronutrients, protein and fats, then you miss out on the abundance of different types of micronutrients that are containing things like fruits and vegetables. So, things like sweet potatoes, really, really abundant in micros, and all the fruits also. So always consider that one before you decide to be like a keto powerlifter. Source of carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates can be fruit, sports drinks, honey, sweets, chocolate bars, milk, fizzy drinks, and various others. Simple carbohydrates you're probably going to want to consume sparingly throughout the day or in a greater quantity during and after your workouts. Complex carbohydrates, potatoes, rice, pasta, couscous, vegetables, cereals and grains, and various others. They're the type that I would use as a staple kind of throughout the day. Fats. Fats are the body's preferred source of energy when at rest or when doing very light aerobic activity. Okay, so let me explain how this works. So, throughout your day, you're burning a mixture of fuel, protein, carbs, fats. You're always burning a mixture. However, when you engage in intense exercise, the proportion of glucose that you burn as fuel increases. So the more intense the exercise, the higher the proportion of carbohydrates that you burn for fuel, and obviously the lower proportion of fats. However, if you are at rest, you're burning predominantly fat, and if you're doing very, very, very light walking, again, it's fat. So fats are responsible for providing protection for the organs and insulating the body. Fats are key for proper hormonal function, as we've touched upon before. How many fats? Research tells us that in order to achieve optimal hormonal function, a person should consume a diet consisting of more than 15 to 20% of total calories from fat. This is very important for the athlete. Of course, you know, if you have optimal testosterone levels, then that's going to be way better than being, depleted in testosterone or low in testosterone. You only have to look at performance-enhancing drugs for a very expanded, dramatic effect in terms of kind of looking at that argument. So the 15 to 20% bare minimum rule here is, in a way, it's misleading, because whether you're on maintenance, restricted calories, or an abundance of calories will affect what that percentage actually means in terms of numbers. So I would take that as being maintenance calories. So your maintenance calories, 20% of those at least want to come from fats. Now this is especially if you're a tested athlete, someone who doesn't use performance enhancing drugs. Of course, an untested athlete is injecting testosterone into him or herself, so that number might not be as crucial, but that doesn't mean that you should eat no fat in your diet and pay no attention to the type of fat, as you will see in a second. Sources of fat. Saturated fat comes from animal products including meats, eggs, fish and dairy. For vegans, it can come from things like nuts and coconut oil. Monounsaturated fats are nuts, olive oil, avocado, various others. Polyunsaturated, flaxseed, walnuts, fish, grass-fed meat. Omega-3 versus omega-6. Both omega-3 and omega-6 are polyunsaturated fats. Omega-6, linoleic acid, is inflammatory to the body. Omega-3, alpha-linoleic acid, DHA and EPA, so ALA, DHA and EPA, is deflammatory to the body. This is a good thing. The average American diet contains a 10-to-1 ratio. I should have changed that. I've recently read that it's anywhere in between 15 and 20, actually, to 1 ratio. That's quite shocking. Of omega-6 to omega-3. But the ratio we should strive for is 2 to 1, the other way around. So, the Western diet really kind of skews the ratio in terms of what we should actually be getting. If we were primitive man, primitive woman, we would be getting closer to a 2 to 1 ratio, but at the moment it's not the case because of the foods we eat and the sources from which we get those foods. So, DHA and EPA in particular have protective benefits to the heart, eyes and brain. Aim for at least 1 gram daily of DHA and EPA combined. Okay, so what I mean when I say this is, when you look at an omega-3 supplement, you look at how much omega-3 it has in it. Let's say it has a gram of omega-3 in. That might mean that it probably will mean that there's not a gram of DHA and EPA. If you are a type of person who doesn't like things like salmon and the animal sources of omega-3, which is where you would get your DHA and EPA, then you probably do want to, supplement with some fish oil, something like that. So, when you look at the packet, don't just look at how much omega-3 it has in it. Look at how much DHA and EPA it has in it, because they are crucial. So, DHA and EPA are best found in animal sources of omega-3, like wild-caught salmon. If you don't like or eat fish or don't eat fish, consider supplementing with fish oil to give you 1 gram daily. For vegans, it can be algae oil. So if you're a vegan, because your diet will really be quite replete in omega-3, especially DHA and EPA, just because you're not eating any animal sources of food. Really look into supplementing with algae oil. Fibre. Fibre is an indigestible carbohydrate, the sum total of which should not count towards your daily calories. So, even though fibre is a macronutrient, it's an indigestible carbohydrate, you don't count it as a carbohydrate in your macros. However, it does have its purpose for your health. Fibre has benefits in terms of lowering cholesterol, glycemic control, satiety, and of course regularity. How much fibre? The current recommended daily intake for fibre is 30 grams. Some of you may find yourselves on nutrition regimes which exceed that number by default. This should not be a problem unless it causes problems such as hunger loss on a bulking plan or extreme flatulence. So, for example, if you've decided to get you're on a high carb diet, a really high carb diet, and you decide to get all your fibre from, dried apricots, all your carbohydrates from dried apricots and oats, at some point it could become deleterious, and you might end up just, having to switch to a lower fibre diet just so that you can do that bulking diet effectively. Something like switching the pasta, which is high in fibre, for rice, so that you're not bloated all the time and actually feel ready to eat your food. That might be a consideration for those of you who are bulking or looking to add weight. Sources of fibre. You should strive to consume both soluble and insoluble fibre, but as a general rule, if you eat a balanced diet, the food you eat will have a mixture of both. Good sources include cereals, fruits, and vegetables. So what that's saying is, yeah, you want insoluble and soluble, but don't worry about it. You'll probably be getting both if you eat a balanced diet, because a lot of foods include both. Staying hydrated. This is one of the very last slides that I introduced when I realised that I could potentially run out of time on my 30-minute slot for the seminar, so it's only brief. We know that being dehydrated can lead to decrements in both mental and physical performance. So make sure you show up to all of your sessions hydrated and hence properly prepared to exercise. Here's a simple formula to give you a rough guide as to how much fluid to consume per day. It's probably going to be better if you look at the YouTube version of this one rather than me speaking it, or if you pause this and write the formula down. I don't know. Multiply your weight in pounds by 0.66, so that's 2/3 of your weight in pounds. This will give you the amount of water you should be drinking in ounces. Okay, so to convert that to grams or milliliters, because obviously a milliliter of water weighs a gram, simply multiply it by 28 because there are 28 grams in an ounce. Of course, there are 1,000 milliliters in a litre. So to find out how many milliliters you get, and you multiply your 2/3 of your body weight in pounds by 28, and then that's how many milliliters. And there are 1,000 milliliters in a litre. You can work that out. Being hydrated also involves taking in enough electrolytes, so do not be afraid to salt your food. So this comes largely, I think Stan Ethering was one of the people who helped to dispel this myth, but a lot of you who've been coached by old school bodybuilders would be all about the low sodium, zero sodium almost diet, saying that sodium's outlawed because it quote unquote makes you hold water. Well, that's not such a bad thing, especially for your performance. So do not be afraid to salt your food. Putting it all together. Again, if you're watching on the YouTube, there's a picture of Dan Green, one of my all-time favourites. In fact, the person who inspired me to get into powerlifting. Okay, so the hierarchy of nutritional importance, that's just a fancy name for it, but I'm just telling you here what you should prioritise in terms of your nutrition. So the first one is calories in versus calories out. That's the most important thing, especially if you're on a weight loss or weight gain regime or want to maintain, whichever. That will make the biggest difference. Even, if you're looking for performance, you want to be in a slight caloric surplus if possible, because at that point you'll be most anabolic. So calories in, calories out, that's number one. If you don't worry about anything else, worry about that. Macronutrient breakdown is number two. So the amount of protein, carbs, fats, fibre you are taking in. If you do not care about the types of food you're eating and you want to do IFYM, it will work better than having no control over your macros, certainly. So it's more important to count your macros than it is to just focus on specific foods and not have a clue what macros you're taking in. Number 3 is eating specific foods. So once you've got your calories and your macronutrient breakdown right, those specific foods where you're thinking about, the salmon as we've discussed for your omega-3s, what type of carbohydrates you're going to eat when, complete protein sources, and when you're going to eat your protein, and that ties into the next one. Number 4 is nutrient timing on meal frequency. So if you only eat one meal a day, it's going to be way, way, way worse than eating 4 meals a day. But for example, if you have the right amount of calories in that meal, if you're consuming all of your calories in that meal and it's the correct amount of calories for your goal, then that will be more important than how many meals you have in that day. Okay, so calculating your macronutrient breakdown. So this is how I do it with my clients. Once you know how many calories you need to maintain your body weight and what calorie goal you're shooting for, start with protein. Set your protein anywhere in between 1.2 and 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight daily. Next, fats. Set your fats at 20 to 25% of the total calories you're aiming for. Divide the number of calories from fat by 9 to get the amount in grams. Once you've worked out how many calories you're getting from protein, that's grams of protein times 4 because there are 4 calories per gram of protein. Subtract that along with the calories from fat from your total calories. This will leave you with the number of calories you need from carbs. Divide this number by 4 to get the total grams. Here's an example. John is 100 kilos and maintaining his body weight on 3,000 calories. His goal is to maintain his body weight but implement more structure to his nutrition with a better macro split. Starting with protein at the high end of the bracket for recommendations, we'll go for 2.0 grams per kilogram of body weight daily. So that's what I normally do with my clients, the 2 grams per kilo of body weight, simply because until I was aware of this new research with the higher amount of protein, the 2.2, I just stuck with the old upper bracket, but it seems to work pretty well. So yeah, so for John, that's 200 grams because he weighs 100 kilos. 200 times 4, i.e. 200 grams of protein, times 4, which is a number of calories in a gram of protein, is 800 calories. For fats, we'll also go with 25%. A moderate fat diet to keep hormones in check. So, in this case, that's 3,000 times 0.25, that's how you work out a quarter or something, which is 750 calories, or 750 divided by 9, because there are 9 calories in a gram of fat. That's 83 grams of fat that John needs. 3,000 minus 800 minus 750 equals 1450. So we need 1450 calories from carbohydrates. Again, there are 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate too. So 1450 divided by 4 equals 362.5 grams of carbohydrate. John needs per day 200 grams of protein, 362.5 grams of carbohydrate, and 83 grams of fat. Now, looking at that just via the formula, that looks about right. That looks pretty spot on. It works out well in theory as well as practice. How to implement it. Divide your meals into 4 or 5 servings throughout the day. Some dieting females on lower calories may experience better satiety on 3 meals. That's because as females get really lean and on really low calories, sometimes just the amount of food isn't enough to stretch the stomach enough and make them feel full per meal. So that feeling of never ever being full, it's just not, it can get old very quickly. I mean, of course you have to suffer on diets, but at some point to get really lean, but just having those 3 bigger meals can really help. So sometimes, not always, 3 meals can be used. Have all your meals equal in protein, but eat your biggest carbohydrate meals post-workout. It may also be beneficial to consume some easily digestible high glycemic carbs, i.e. sports drinks, mid-workout. I mean, you can consume things like Haribo too. if you are that way inclined. So the reason for this is, at that point you're actually burning carbohydrates as a primary source of fuel. So of course it makes sense to have the bulk of your carbohydrates then mid and post workout. That's exactly what I do. That's what I do with my clients. Now, a lot of people actually, going on to the next point, a lot of people actually consume high carbohydrate meals pre-workout. So they think a pre-workout meal should be high in carbs. But as I recently discovered for myself, having a high carbohydrate meal just makes me feel sleepy. It releases a lot of insulin, which is a storage hormone. So storage is associated with go to sleep, conserve energy, store. Whereas protein actually releases glucagon. Glucagon signals the body to release energy. You want to be releasing energy when you train. So that's why 1.5 hours before I train, I consume a high-fat, high-protein meal rather than a high-carbohydrate one, and my workouts are just fine on that. Then when the body is switched over to burning more carbohydrates, I start to consume carbohydrates as the workout goes on. Okay, so post-workout, simple sugars, high glycemic carbs can be consumed more freely as insulin sensitivity is higher. Also, like I've just explained, you're burning carbohydrates as the primary source of fuel there. This is also a good time to consume fruit, because fructose ups glycogen intake. Upping glycogen intake is what you want to do post-workout. I've gone over the last point. Okay, so what about fat loss? So if you're watching on YouTube, that is a picture of Ronnie Coleman. I think the fact that there is his glutes are striated to death, and his back has striations in it. That's a mighty display of a Christmas tree, is the same bodybuilding. Indicates that the guy has little to no fat on him, and to say he probably weighed about 300 pounds in that picture is pretty impressive. Anyway, enough of me worshipping Ronnie Coleman. So what about fat loss? Simple. If you are currently on your maintenance calories, start by taking off 400 to 500 calories from your daily amount. As a powerlifter, it is advantageous to have full glycogen reserves. We've already discussed this, as this will improve your leverages. Therefore, if you have a surplus of fat in your diet, it may be a good idea to take your initial calories, at least in part, from fats. So that's if you have a surplus of fat. Don't take them off if it looks like they're actually aiding you in terms of your recovery and your hormonal function. You may just have to take the calories from carbs, or you might have to take them a bit from each, some from carbs, some from fats. Keep your protein the same. Once weight loss has truly stalled, either add some low-intensity steady-state cardio. Now, low-intensity steady-state cardio done at particularly at zone 2 and sometimes at zone 1 just for recovery can actually be really, really beneficial to powerlifters. There are articles written by Andy Thomas Smith and a previous podcast episode actually with him that explains the benefits of cardio for powerlifters. If anyone would like to the link to the article on cardio by Andy Smith, just shoot me a message at Big Alexander Clarke on Instagram, or just British Strength Magazine at Instagram, and if you're a subscriber, I'll send you the back issue. Anyway, you should have some cardio in there anyway, but if you don't, take advantage of this and you can add cardio at this point when weight loss starts to stall. Or you can take away another 200 calories to get things moving again. If you're doing this going into a powerlifting competition, I would advise doing this early and gradually so that there is minimal to no strength loss and you can do the final few weeks of your peak on maintenance calories. So in my opinion, the best time to diet is actually after a powerlifting competition, when you're going into a bodybuilding style, hypertrophy, volume style block. And the reason for this is the emphasis on lifting heavier weights isn't as much, and you're burning more calories through your training. Your coach might even have you doing some GPP style work where you're burning more calories that way, so you're essentially doing cardio there. But if you're doing this going up to a comp, if you're probably 5-6 kilos heavy and you know that you won't be able to water cut all that weight, or it's not advantageous to water cut all that weight because of just how hard it will be to get it back on, and 3, the stress, then you should start far out from your powerlifting comp and try to get back to maintenance calories once you've done all your dieting a few weeks out, so that you can do your peak and you can practice training at that weight for as long as you possibly can. So, and obviously doing it gradually helps, because you don't just want to drop a load of weight off and a load of calories off, because that can just lead to, decrements in your performance in terms of strength. So what about muscle gain? If your calories are currently at maintenance, simply add 10% of your calories onto your current daily amount. These calories should come from carbohydrates, or partly from carbs and partly from fats. Remember, you're either anabolic or catabolic. Don't expect to gain only muscle or lose only fat. However, depending on your genetics and the other factors you have at your disposal, there are ways to optimize either bulking or cutting. Doing either gradually is the first port of call. So what I'm saying is, by other factors at your disposal there, you might have great genetics, and you might be the type of person who, when he or she goes into a caloric surplus, you're going to gain more muscle compared to someone else than you do fat. Or you may be on anabolics, you might be taking steroids, you might be taking growth hormone. Again, you will probably get leaner gains doing that. It all depends on these things, but in order to quote-unquote lean bulk, then it's best to take, if you do a gradual approach, you're obviously going to gain a higher amount of muscle than you do fat, because fat can pile on really quickly if you just go into this massive surplus. Sure, you'll gain some muscle, but those gains might not always, look the best, and they might take you way out of the weight class that you want to be in. I'd just like to say, as I did at the seminar, thank you for listening, and again, thank you to Megan Kocher for organising the seminar. Of course, this isn't in the seminar setting, but thank you to her again. And at the end there is a little list of references. Okay, so thank you very much to all the listeners for listening to this. Again, if you would like to support the generation of future episodes of this podcast, head over to BritishStrengthMagazine.com and subscribe. This is another short episode. Actually, the past two have been 30 minutes or so in length, and I'm hoping we do have some guests lined up, and we will be able to go back onto a slightly longer format from then. So if you like your 1 hour / 90-minute episodes, then we'll be back to those soon, and back with new episodes also soon. Thank you.